It's a very exciting time for, I think, all of us in the athletic department around the university to formally announce and share with you and with our fan base, what really is a pretty significant capital improvement program, investment program for WVU athletics. Before I get started and start talking about some of the specific projects, let me just thank a few folks. Number one, I'd like to thank Mike Zuhl, our Associate AD for Business and Finance. He's done a marvelous job going back a number of months working with the university's Business and Finance office, particularly on the bonding side of this, but as well as on the facilities. I want to thank April and all the facilities folks for the work they've done. It's it's always nice to plan new projects and new infrastructure, and I think everybody's really gotten very excited about the opportunities we have. I also want to thank a group that I think goes unnoticed sometimes, which is the excellent job over the last really 44 years that our preventive maintenance team has done. If you think about the Coliseum, this building 44 years old, the football stadium 34 years old, beautiful buildings. We're not going to replace them. And our group over the years, I think, has done a marvelous job of maintaining those facilities. And that's a real credit, I think, to certainly previous administrations and the folks who, at the end of the day, are working hard to maintain all those facilities. So I also want to emphasize one thing and make a very strong point, which is that we still require approval from the Higher Education Policy Coordinating Board. I think is that the proper title? Commission, Higher Education Policy Commission, HEPC, what we call HEPC. So the process has been, Mike Zuhl started this process with the university's Business and Finance office. That then moved on to the University Planning Committee, which is the entity here at WVU that approves projects over $25,000. It then went on to two committees of the Board of Governors, the Finance Committee chaired by Bill Nutting and the Facilities Committee chaired by Diane Lewis. And then it went to the full Board of Governors this past Friday. We received approval there. But before this can go into effect, we do need approval of HEPC. HEPC meets at the end of this month, and we look forward to sharing our plans with the folks from HEPC. So let me, if I could, divide up my comments into a couple of different tranches. First of all, is the bond and the financing. So we will receive approximately $75 million from a bond that the university is issuing. That money is backed up, if you will. The underlying credit is our Big 12 contract, which, as I think everybody knows, goes for a 12-year period with the granting of rights. And that primarily comes from the Big 12's contracts in turn with Fox and ESPN. That's a primary cause of our ability to go out and be able to bond like this. In addition, to a lesser degree, the guaranteed revenue from a multimedia contract with IMG. So that's $75 million. Another $25 million will come from our fundraising efforts. The Mountaineer Athletic Club, Matt Borman, who does a marvelous job with the MAC, is not here today. Included already in that $25 million is approximately, what, Mike, about $5 million? $5 million for the new team room that's already been raised. So we expect we expect Matt to be able to go out and raise another $20 million or so for this project. In addition to that, there is, in our multimedia rights agreement, there is a capital contribution that IMG will make over the course of 12 years. It's $500,000 a year, a total of $6 million. Right now we have about 2.5 of that $6 million dedicated to basically three projects. One, a marquee outside the Coliseum here, which will give us the opportunity to let people know, and there's lots of traffic, as you all know, up and down Monongahela Boulevard as well as on Patterson Drive. It'll give folks a chance who are driving to know what's going on inside this building, what's going on inside the CAC. I've always thought it's kind of a shame that the folks at the CAC have to put up a sign with two stakes in the ground to let people know that the Glass Menagerie is taking place there, or any of the concerts or shows they put on. So we'll have a marquee that will be out here along the Coliseum that will be able to advertise and promote events in the Coliseum and over at the Creative Arts Center, as well as potentially some other university events. We will have a new scoreboard on the north end zone to replace the other scoreboard. How old is that initial scoreboard, April? Do you know offhand?
Well, it was redone in 2003.
So that's from 2003, so we'll have a new scoreboard on the north end zone. And as well, we will have, we'll decorate the walls. Decorate's not a good term. We'll dress up the walls of the stadium and have LED boards in each of the four corners of Mountaineer Field. So those projects are on their own path in terms of approvals, and we're looking forward to those being in place for the upcoming academic year. It's a little bit tight schedule-wise, but we think we can get it done for the upcoming academic year. So those are the three financial sources: a $75 million bond, a $25 million fundraising effort by the Mountaineer Athletic Club, and then the $6 million in contribution from IMG per their contract with us. And again, of that $6 million, we've allocated right now about 2.5, so there's another 3.5 that would be available down the road. In terms of what we plan to do with the bond money, we are certain, and you've seen some of the drawings here, we're certain that we will invest a significant portion, over 50%, in the football stadium. And we will do considerable work on the concourses and on the entrances to Mountaineer Field. The stadium's held up well. As I had mentioned, our folks over the years, I think, have done a marvelous job of preventive maintenance, but I think there needs to be some upgrades, not necessarily for the players. This is really all for fans and fan enjoyment at Mountaineer Field. We'll do a lot of work on concessions. We'll do a lot of work on restrooms. As you can see, some of the entrances will be dressed up and made a little bit more accessible. We have a significant problem, as many of you may know, with pyrite over on the west concourse. Pyrite is, I'm not a geologist, so I'm out of my zone of knowledge here, but pyrite is sort of rock that pushes up, based on our soils, and we've got some real issues there with lots of doors that don't shut properly. And if you remember, I think it was the first game that Oklahoma came here, the first year of the Big 12, and the 25-second clock wouldn't work for maybe a quarter or two, and it was because the conduit coming from the press box down to the scoreboard has been bent and shaped so terribly over the years by the pyrite that we needed, our folks are telling us we've really got to repair that. So we'll do significant work on both concourses, the east and west, at Mountaineer Field, with restrooms, with restroom facilities, with concessions. We will also upgrade the so-called box seating, the original VIP seats, if you will, at the stadium back in 1980, which really haven't been touched, with new seats and some heaters, and try to dress those up a little bit because they are, I think, still some of the best seats at the stadium. So we understand what we're going to do with the football stadium. Heery Architects is on board and has developed a lot of the plans, and we've been able to cost those out. As we move away from the football stadium here to the Coliseum complex, we have a lot of options of things that we're looking at, but really haven't decided finally on what we want to do. But we know there are a number of things that really need to be done. First of all, downstairs, I think as many of you know, the College of Physical Activity and Sports Science, CPAS, is moving out. Their new building will be finished this summer over at Evansdale, so they will vacate all of the spaces, virtually all of the spaces that they have downstairs. That includes their classroom space, the old racquetball courts, those that have been renovated into classrooms. It includes all of their office space. Our plan is to move all of our staff that is downstairs in the concourse, to move them up. Gymnastics is down there, baseball, track down there as well, I think. No? Track is, right. So we're going to move them upstairs here, and we'll be able to take the vacated CPAS space, which is substantial, and redo our concourses. Right now, based on, I guess, federal standards, right now we are 102 restroom units short of what we need for a building of this capacity. And that's significant. We're also 21 points of sale in terms of concessions short of what we need with a building with this capacity. I know you all are usually busy at halftime writing stories of a basketball game, but if you go out in the concourse at halftime and there's 10, 11,000 people, it gets pretty crowded. So we look forward to repurposing a lot of the space downstairs in the concourse that CPAS will vacate, and having really a concourse that's probably more designed for basketball fans, volleyball, wrestling, et cetera, all the events that take place here at the Coliseum. We don't have final plans for that yet. We're looking at a lot of things, costing things out. There still are some issues. You all remember the asbestos issue that existed here a number of years ago. Well, it's not all been removed, is my understanding. So as CPAS moves out of some of their space, there are still some asbestos issues that we have to deal with. So we need to move prudently but carefully. But we do believe that that's an important priority here at the Coliseum complex. Another important priority that really doesn't have a direct effect on any of our student athletes, but I think it reflects on the university, is to build a second locker room at the soccer stadium at Delesk Stadium. Right now, as many of you know who follow soccer, the visiting teams at halftime go into a tent right next to the third base line, if you will, the left field line at the baseball stadium. I don't think it reflects well on us, and so we're very focused on building a second visiting team locker room at Delesk. Another project that we believe is very important out here at the Coliseum complex is the Shell building. A beautiful building, opened up in 1980. Really not much has been done in that building since the early 80s. And we plan on redoing the entire HVAC system in the Shell building, plan on a new surface. We would like to put a banked track in that building. It gets a lot of use, not just from our track program, but from folks around the community, including Waynesburg College, other smaller schools that don't have an indoor track facility. But we plan on making sure that's one of the priorities with what we're doing out here at the Coliseum complex. It needs a good bit of work. I think the surface in the Shell building is the exact same surface that was originally laid down in 1980 or 1981, so that needs a little bit of work. We also have a couple of other potential projects out here. The tennis courts. The tennis courts right down the hill here really are not of proper competition size. It might be a little bit of a shock to find that out, but the tennis courts are not proper competition size, and we need to figure out how to get them to proper competition size. And that's a venue that's obviously important for us. We've got the natatorium. That's a beautiful building, but it does not offer and doesn't have the capacity for a 50-meter pool. Quite honestly, I was amazed at Bryce Bowman, one of our swimmers this past year, who became a two-time All-American for us, an excellent student and a great kid, that he was able to do that by training in a pool. It's only a 25-meter pool. I sort of joked it's the equivalent of asking Coach Carey or Coach Huggins to only use half court to practice and then play a full court game. So we've got to figure out how we can look at the natatorium and make that a venue that really allows us to compete in the Big 12, which is obviously a pretty competitive league for swimming. So we've only built, as many of you know, since I was a student athlete here, there have only been 2 competition venues that have been built new. And I say that simply to let you know that a lot of our competition venues, primarily football and, of course, here at the Coliseum, have aged. Now, we've maintained them very well. They've aged very gracefully, if you will. 34 years of football, 44 years here at the Coliseum. But I think we reached a point where we believe that we needed to upgrade these facilities. Many of you traveled out to Iowa State for the first football game between Iowa State and WVU a couple of years ago. Their stadium is effectively Mountaineer Field, built by the same architect, same general contractor, Hunt Construction, out of Indianapolis. And if you notice what they did, their building was built 2 or 3 years before ours was built. If you notice what they did, they renovated their concourse levels. Of course, it's a little bit easier to do there. They've got a lot of flat space. They renovated their concourse levels by pushing out their buildings, their restrooms, their concessions. And I think they did a marvelous job. Our staff that was out there took a long tour of that facility and did a marvelous job. And that's something I think that we need to do here as well. So we have these great venues. We don't anticipate, certainly at least in the next 10, 15, 20 years, of building a new basketball arena or a new football stadium. That's really prohibitive in terms of cost. And I think that this infusion of close to $106 million, even maybe a little bit more than 106, depending on how well the Mountaineer Athletic Club can raise private funds, we think it's a very timely injection of money to update and renovate and rejuvenate the facilities that we have. And I would stress two things as I close. I'm happy to take questions. I would stress two things as I close. One is that this doesn't include at all the around about $20 million for the new baseball park that's being built within eyeshot here up at University Town Center. That project is moving well, and we anticipate a February of 2015 opening of the new baseball park. That's important. And secondly, we also have with this bond the ability to kind of set a little bit of money aside to make sure that we can do with our Coliseum parking. I'm looking at Joyce Buckley, who does a marvelous job organizing all of our parking, but that as the university goes through its Evansdale renovation plan, and as the intersection there in front of the Arboretum is changed for the Evansdale project, it gives us the opportunity to really look at our parking here. We all know it's tight. We all know there's not enough parking for basketball games, certainly for men's basketball games. And it allows us to have a little bit of money set aside if we need, in fact, to redo the parking lines here at the Coliseum parking lot, or perhaps an additional entrance or whatever may be done. So we want to make sure that we're in sync with the university as they go through their Evansdale renovation plan, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. Final thing I'll say is it's an exciting time for us to do this. It's also a very exciting time, I think, to invest money in Morgantown and Monongalia County. You all are aware the university's got all sorts of projects going on. I think I read recently of the 5 public-private partnerships that WVU has in terms of facilities for students. This is another $100 and some million that'll be invested. Really, if you include the baseball park, $125 million being invested in bricks and mortar in Monongalia County, which I think is just good for the local community. We've got great growth going on here. The recent demographics report highlights that statewide. A lot of counties are struggling, but Mon County is booming, really, along with the counties over in the Eastern Panhandle. That's an exciting time to be able to say that we're injecting $125 million of capital improvements in the local community. So with that, I think I will close and take any questions that folks may have.
Oliver, is it your intent to use every or almost every dime of that $75 million from the bond, or to have any rainy day fund or anything like that aside from parking lot issues?
We haven't really talked about a rainy day fund, but I do think we'll need to set a little bit aside to make sure that we cover the things we need to cover. It's always a challenge, in a market like this that is growing and there is considerable infrastructure investment, considerable capital investment. Sometimes your prices might be a little bit higher because your contractors are busy. They're working on this project or working on that project, working on the new Ruby Tower going up. So we need to make sure that we're smart with the allocations that we make. We don't anticipate setting aside a rainy day fund, but we certainly will set aside some additional dollars, primarily I think for parking as we discussed.
Well, for timeline, obviously a couple of these projects are somewhat immediate, but the rest of them, what do you envision, 10 years?
Well, I'll defer a little bit to Mike Zuhl on the timelines, but I know football-wise, we would like to be able to get in after this upcoming football season. We don't really know, to be honest, if we can do both concourses simultaneously. It depends a lot on contractor capacity. Effectively, what we're doing on both concourses is a mirror image of what will happen, but we're not quite sure if we can do that in one off season, or if we have to do the West Concourse first and then the East Concourse a year later, or vice versa. A lot of that will depend a little bit on contractor capacity and subcontractor capacity.
for a number?
Coliseum-wise, I'm sorry, Coliseum-wise, CPAS will be out more or less this summer. We probably would need a little bit more time because we don't have an architect or an engineer hired at this point for the Coliseum work, so we'll need a little bit more time on that. That may be a couple of years down the pike. Yes?
All the potential projects that are outlined, how will you kind of, is there a pecking order there? I know you went over some of them, but how will you determine what to do?
That's really a discussion that I think we ultimately have with our staff here and to a certain degree with folks downtown in Norval Weiss's office. I think it's safe to say that the concourse downstairs is a priority. This is obviously a visited venue, more so than soccer or the Shell building. So we want to make sure we take advantage of CPAS moving out and this space opening up. So I think that's clearly a top priority. The Shell building is important. It gets a lot of use, again, not just from our student athletes, but from folks around the community. So that's a pretty good priority. The additional locker room over at the Delesk Stadium is a pretty small project. Quite honestly, it doesn't take too much to build a locker room, but I think it does reflect poorly on us that our visiting teams have to go into a tent to spend halftime. So there's, I think there's a developing consensus amongst our staff of which projects will bubble up to the top of the list.
Expanding on that, you said roughly half the money is going to go to the football stadium. How many projects do you think then on that list could be actually completed?
I think we'll certainly be able to do the Coliseum concourse downstairs here. Again, with one hesitation, there is some asbestos issues that will sort of reemerge as people move out and tile is removed from certain areas. I think we'll be able to get the concourse done. I do think the Shell building is an important one just because of the multi-use aspect of that. There's also an additional locker rooms and a weight room in the Shell that we're looking at doing. That building is used by a lot of folks from rowing, all the way down. So I feel comfortable we can get that into the project. The soccer locker room doesn't cost very much at all. That's probably one we can squeeze in. And then we'll have to sort of see. As I mentioned, we want to make sure we get the parking situation as organized as we possibly can here. So we're going to set aside some dollars for that. But I think it's safe to say concourse downstairs, Shell building, locker room over at soccer are all doable within the remaining dollars.
Oliver, any thoughts or conversation on, in an effort possibly to open up parking here some, to maybe at your baseball stadium putting together a spring sports complex, including the track and the tennis courts over there, and opening that space up?
At this point, not really. I mean, we've purchased, I think, something like 9 acres of property where the ballpark is going to be built. It's, I think, 7.2 acres of usable property. That's already is and will become an even better retail complex up there. There's lots of office space being planned up there. I'm not sure that University Town Center ownership wants to give us free land for track and field or other venues. It's certainly something we can look at, but at this point we don't have any plans to remove anybody else but the baseball team, and that's I think a great opportunity to do that along with a minor league team coming in here. So that I think is something that really hasn't been on our radar screen. It takes a lot of land to put it, even the track and field in if you have the requisite parking and all that.
Did you solve some of the parking issues with the Holly Field repurposing, or is that all set?
We could. We could solve some issues. Like, what's the baseball field? An acre and a half, maybe 2 acres. You can get more or less 125 cars in on an acre. So that may add a couple hundred cars there if we decide that's the best and highest use of that property. We may decide just in the interim to use it for parking, and then have the ability to change that down the road. You can gravel it without too much of a cost. But we do want to make sure that parking, and it's not a very attractive topic to talk about for a lot of folks, but any sports venue without adequate parking really becomes a white elephant very quickly. We're seeing that a little bit at football, just as our medical complex grows, and it's great because that drives the health sciences center. Our medical complex really drives the economy here in Morgantown. But as they build the Rosenbaum Family Center and they build another 10-story tower, parking all of a sudden becomes at a real premium. So that's one of the reasons we want to set aside some money and just sort of wait and see how parking plays out. The university is adding, I think, 400 and some parking spots with their Evansdale renovation. We anticipate that most of those, if not all, will be available to basketball fans. But again, we have to sort of make sure that we have the adequate parking that we need here at the Coliseum. And the repurposing of Holly Field could be part of that.
So to be clear, what the Hall Field will become long-term wise hasn't been determined?
No, has not been determined. Has not been. We know we don't need it as a baseball stadium once the new building's open. So we have no plans to have a softball team. So we've taken that off the table. So it's space, and we really have to sit and think what's the best and highest use of that space. And I think in the interim, more than likely, it becomes parking. But that remains to be seen. We haven't made a final decision on that.